Welcome, dear listener, to a journey through the realms of imagination and intrigue. Consider to subscribe and join. More enchanting tales are on the horizon. For our cherished followers, a special gift. 10 lucky subscribers will receive a copy of my short stories book in special binding before it's published to the world. My mother gave birth to me at a tender age. I never knew my father. My mother was tight-lipped about him. His existence was more of a phantom than a reality. His image was absent from our lives, with not a single photo to offer a hint of the man he might have been. Perhaps it was because of our rootlessness, our constant shuffling between different corners of New York City, that my mother lacked any solid friendships. The only exception to her isolation was the elderly woman in our apartment building, a bond perhaps fostered by their shared interest in plants, or maybe because of the woman's inherent kindness. They were as close as two friends could be. The elderly woman entrusted my mother with the keys to her apartment. Her own children lived far away in Boston, and when she traveled to visit them, my mother dutifully took care of her collection of plants. The old woman's most prized possession was an ancient Japanese bonsai tree, the mere sight of which was always a source of awe and fascination for me. One scorching summer day, as we strolled outside our apartment building, the old woman suddenly clutched at her chest, staggering towards a nearby bench. My mother immediately dialed ambulance. I watched on, my mind a whirl of fear and confusion. The old woman's life slipped away before the ambulance even arrived. In the midst of the ensuing chaos, my mother gave me the keys to the old woman's apartment, her voice barely a whisper. "Noah, go and fetch the bonsai tree." Chained with fear, I did not know what to think or do. I absent-mindedly took the key and ran towards the building to get the tree. The old woman's apartment was a time capsule, echoing with a lifetime of memories. Its musty air was filled with the sweet scent of dried lavender and fresh soil. The wooden floors, worn and weathered, creaked under my feet. The room was dimly lit by the twilight filtering through the lace curtains, casting a spectral light on the antique furniture. Against the far wall was an old walnut bookcase filled with dusty old books. The centerpiece of the room was a large bay window that framed an impressive collection of indoor plants. Nestled among them was the old tree, a swaying, swirling Japanese cedar with well-kept needles and branches. My heart pounded in my chest as I placed the bonsai tree on our kitchen table. It dawned on me then, the gravity of the situation. I had stolen this precious tree from a woman who had died in front of my eyes moments earlier. The guilt washed over me like a tidal wave, threatening to drag me under. Before I could gather my thoughts, the door burst open. I nearly jumped out of my skin, but it was only my mother, her face etched with a mix of relief and concern. That night, sleep eluded me. The strange events of the day replayed in my dreams, twisting into a nightmarish maze of guilt and fear. At the center of the maze, the stolen bonsai tree sat, a silent accuser. As I reached out to touch it, the old woman materialized beside me, her spectral figure pointing an accusatory finger at me as she shrieked, "Thief!" I awoke drenched in cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. A primal fear prickled at the base of my neck, the sensation of being watched. My eyes scanned the room, and from the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a flicker of movement. Hiding beneath the safety of my blanket, I tried to calm my racing heart. My mind, I told myself, was playing tricks on me. When I finally found the courage to peek from beneath the covers, my eyes darted to the corner of my room. To my horror, the shadow was still there. I looked up, and I saw a strange black shadow. It wasn't tall at all. It was rather slim, and it was about my height. It stood motionless before it started to vibrate when I laid my eyes on it. With fear, I realized my body was no longer listening to me. I got up from the bed, and the only thing I could do was to witness as my body walked slowly towards the shadow. I opened the door to go into the living room. There it was, a shadow right next to the bonsai tree. I came to my senses and started to scream. Within a second, my mother appeared in the living room. My mother hugged me and said that I had a bad dream because of the recent situation. She told me that we could sleep together in her bed that night. I couldn't remember the last time we did that, probably when I was very little. All of a sudden, I felt like a little boy. I hugged my mom to feel her warmth, and I was the happiest I had ever been in a long time. Exactly 7 days had passed since that dream, and I was not even sure if the shadow was real or not anymore. But I again woke up in a cold sweat, and I saw the black shadow in the corner of the room. Again, it led me towards the bonsai tree. And just as I stood there, the roots of the tree came up from the soil and began working against my throat, trying to choke me. I screamed. My mom came out and looked at me. I told her what happened. She didn't take me to her room that night. I knew that something had to change, and I was prepared for the third night of the spectral visitor. For a few nights after the second incident, I tried not to sleep at all. I tried to sleep everywhere else I could, at school, at the park, everywhere but home. I was afraid. It was working so-so because the first 2 nights I could pull that off. By night 3, it was already harder. By the 4th night, I was grumpy and aggressive. And it was that night that the shadow appeared right in front of me, and I got scared. I walked back a few steps with hands waving in the air, and by accident I hit the tree and knocked it over. The tree fell to the floor, making a tremendous crashing noise of pottery and dry earth being scattered around. The light flicked on in my mother's bedroom, and in a moment she was standing in the doorframe, looking at me at the place where the bonsai tree used to stand on the floor. "Noah, what the hell did you do?" she said angrily. "This is ridiculous. You are not a little boy anymore. Come on." "Mom, it wasn't me, I swear. It was the shadow." I pointed at the spot where a minute ago the shadow appeared, scaring the living hell out of me. "What is that?" She pointed to the floor, near what he thought were some small rocks. There were a bunch of them, so I was curious, and I picked one up. As soon as I picked it up, I immediately dropped it. It was a human finger. There was no mistake about it. I screamed. My mother, apparently scared that I got scared, screamed also. I thought there was no way that it was a human finger. So I got on the floor to get a closer look, and there it was. It looked bad, like it was still decomposing. I saw bones, nails, and everything. It was disgusting to look at, and I threw up. "Noah, what are you—" I pointed at the floor. She bent down to take a better look. I watched her, and she had realized what they were yet. "Mom, those are human fingers," I said in a surprisingly, to me, calm voice, even though inside I was shaking. She looked at me, and she became pale. "No, no," she said. "There is no way. This is just—" But her words were lost because she could not come up with what it was. "No, no, no, this can't be." My mom got a garbage bag. We threw the bonsai tree inside with all the broken pottery. We agreed to throw out the tree and never talk about what happened to anyone, the fact that we stole the bonsai tree and the fingers we found in the soil. She carefully put the fingers inside of a separate bag and closed it. "I will bury these at the cemetery tomorrow." I was surprised. I thought she would throw them out along with the tree in trash. My mother was never a religious woman, but I supported her decision to do that. It sounded right. That night I was afraid to go to sleep alone. Apparently, my mother was afraid to go to bed by herself, as well as the small bag with the fingers was laying on our living room floor. So that night, again, we slept together in her bed. The following night I got into bed with anticipation. I was ready for a good sleep without any shadows. I slipped beneath the crisp, cool sheets of my bed, the faint scent of laundered linen filling my nostrils. A hushed silence blanketed the room, broken only by the occasional distant bark of a stray dog or ambulance rushing outside of the windows. A night without shadows, I thought to myself, hoping that the removal of the cursed tree and its grotesque fingers would banish the unsettling nightmares that had been plaguing my life. My heart raced as the memory of the human fingers stashed in the pottery pot resurfaced. The image was vivid, the fingers grotesquely real, their pallid complexion in stark contrast to the earthy terracotta. "Hold on," I told myself. We were so scared that no one asked how the hell those human fingers got into the old lady's pottery. A shiver ran down my spine as I wondered how they had ended up there, and my mind began to spin wild theories. Just as I was about to close my eyes, there was a knock at the door, a sound that made my heart leap in my chest. My body jerked reflexively, as if jolted by a sudden surge of electricity. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, my mind racing. It couldn't be my mother. Her entrances were always without ceremony, like a sudden gust of wind that sweeps into a room without warning. I huddled under the blanket, my breath hitching in my throat. Perhaps it was just my imagination, I tried to reassure myself, still rattled by the events of the previous day. But then, there it was again. A knock. Faster, more insistent this time, like a drummer increasing his tempo, building up to a crescendo. Fear and curiosity battled within me. The shadow that had haunted me previously never knocked. It would just appear, a phantom guest that arrived uninvited. So who or what was this? I summoned the courage to respond, my voice barely above a whisper. "Come in." The door creaked open, just a sliver, and in slipped the shadow. It was unmistakably the same as the previous night, but it had undergone a transformation. No longer was it a shivering, vague figure. Now, it had the clear contours of a person, all dark except the fingers that were shimmering with a silver glow. The shadow beckoned me, a silent siren call. It turned away, gliding effortlessly into the living room, pausing to look back at me before disappearing into a crack. I hesitated for a moment. I moved my toes and shifted my torso. This time I was in full control of my body, and it looked like the shadow wanted me to follow it. I moved the blanket and then I followed. This time I wasn't afraid. I felt a strange sense of control, a determination to follow this spectral guide. The shadow sneaked into the living room as I slowly got out of the bed to follow it. The shadow led me to the living room, then through the hallway, and then under the door. The moment it moved under that door, I already knew where it was going. With worry, I looked back and saw the half-closed door of Mom's bedroom. I turned around and silently opened the entrance door. The shadow led me upstairs, its form dancing in the dim light. It stopped in front of one of the apartments. The apartment of the old lady that passed away weeks ago. The doors in this building were sparse, only 2 per floor, and this was one of them. The shadow seemed to sniff under the door, then vanished as if absorbed by the wood. A moment of uncertainty washed over me. Then it hit me. I still had the key that my mother had given me. I rushed back to my apartment, snatched the key from its resting place on the shelf, and returned to the locked door. The key turned in the lock with a soft click, and I stepped into the apartment. It was a space caught in a time trap, filled with antique furniture and old photographs with faded edges. The air smelled musty, tinged with a peculiar metallic odor that I couldn't place. The wallpaper was peeling at the corners, revealing patches of damp plaster beneath. A heavy chandelier hung from the ceiling. The furniture was coated in a layer of dust. The apartment was untouched for weeks, but at night it looked like it had been abandoned for years. Mother said that the old lady had some relatives living in Boston, but apparently no one was in there since the moment she had died, because the apartment looked exactly like that when I was there last. Each footstep I took on the creaky wooden floor seemed to echo through the eerie silence, heightening my senses. My eyes scanned the room for the shadow, and I spotted it next to a plant. It was waving its silver fingers in anticipation. I knew what I had to do. I pushed the plant to the floor. It hit the floor with a blunt thud, echoing in the silence of the room. My heart pounded in my chest as I feared someone might hear the noise at this unholy hour. But nothing happened. Among the scattered plant parts and ceramic shards, I saw something twisted. Fingers. But not the fingers of a hand. These were toes. It seemed like the shadow was jumping with joy, moving fluidly to another pot, much larger than the others. It began to circle around it impatiently, its figure blurring in my sight. With disgust and trying not to look at the floor, I approached the pot. A simple tilt and it tipped over, falling to the ground. Even though I expected it, the noise was a harsh crash that sent my heart into my throat. But what I found inside the pot was far worse. A human skull stared back at me. Its empty sockets seemed to gaze into my soul. A scream ripped through the silence, the sound of my own voice startling me. I ran from the apartment, the image of the skull seared into my mind. I darted into my bedroom and dialed police. I didn't even consider waking my mother. This was a nightmare she needn't be a part of. A week passed since that night, and the police were still investigating the findings. The old lady, it turned out, was a self-proclaimed witch and cannibal. She lured lonely people into her apartment, killed them, and consumed their flesh. The leftover bones and body parts were hidden in the pots, veiled behind a sinister ritual. The revelation sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. People whispered in hushed tones, their faces etched with fear and disbelief. I was mentioned in the news as a brave resident who had stumbled upon this horrifying secret. It was obvious I didn't mention anything about the shadow or stolen bonsai tree. I said that I heard some commotion happening from the floor above, so I decided to check, thinking it was thieves trying to rob the apartment of the resident that passed away not that long ago. When I went up, I saw the door open, and when I peeked in, I saw smashed pots and a human skull, so I called the police right away. The cops never asked further questions, and I was happy that they didn't press on. My mother was deeply affected by the whole thing. First, that she had been good friends with the old lady, and second, that there had been killing happening in the apartment directly above us. That whole story left an even bigger impression on my mother, who was really good friends with that lady. She could not stand to live in the building any longer. We decided to move out of the building, unable to bear the memories it held. On the final day, as we prepared to leave, I took one last look at the building. It was a looming structure of brick and mortar. Its once warm facade had become a chilling monument to the horrors it held. And then, for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a silhouette in one of the windows. An elderly lady, watching us. Was it my tired mind playing tricks, or a ghostly farewell from the building's dark past? I couldn't tell, and frankly, I didn't want to know. Thank you for joining for this short story by R.M.Kh. If you enjoyed the journey, please consider showing your support by subscribing to our channel and giving this video a thumbs up. There are many more stories waiting to be told, and we can't wait to share them with you. Until next time, keep the magic of storytelling alive.